Hello, I'm John Silver, and in this episode I'm going to show you how to paint an easy landscape painting, showing you how to do the background, the middle distance, trees, grasses, and a dirt track, complete with stones and pebbles. So in this one, as you see with acrylics, I'm, as usual, knocking in the darker areas. And I do this quite broadly and basically with a fan brush. Not interested in getting details at this point, just the general shapes of the composition. And I can adjust the composition so easily doing it like this, starting off with just Payne's grey and water basically. Although you can use black as well, or any other colour that you decide. It's just to knock, but as long as it's a dark colour, it's just to knock in the basic shapes. Now, as I have said in previous videos, the whole point of painting is to have fun. It's not about trying to reproduce every tiny little leaf on a tree. It's about the feeling you get when looking at that tree and the overall shape that excites you. That's what you're after, not the tiny little details. You must have fun with it. Just tell yourself that before you even start painting. I'm going to have fun painting this painting, and you will. It's supposed to be stress relieving, remember? Painting is supposed to be stress relieving. You don't want it to give you stress. I can't say that enough. You really got to enjoy this. So you can see now I'm just basically knocking in some basic background sky shapes with acrylic, Payne's grey and white. Payne's grey and white, if you get a good quality Payne's grey, has a nice blue tint to it. And it makes for very nice skies. Now again, I'm just forming the foreground with Payne's grey and white to add a little bit of body colour to it, to give me the different variations of tones. And doing it this way, I can see where the basic shapes are, but also the composition. And if I decide, oh, I don't like that there, I'll move it. You know, I can do that easily at this stage. It's when you start putting the colour on, it gets a bit more difficult. So this is the point at which you want to establish where your composition is going. So I'm just knocking in a few random shapes within the foreground to give it interest. Don't want it flat, completely flat. So now with a little bit of, I've added a little bit of yellow ochre into the mix and doing the background trees. Now this is a mid-tone I'm putting in because I want the trees to be reasonably light in the background. So we are starting to add colour. So a little bit of yellow ochre in with the Payne's grey and white. Just darkening it a little bit more towards the base of those trees. And now with a bristle brush, just knocking in a few lighter tones of that yellow ochre, where the light is picking up and hitting the tops of the trees, and you can create the shapes of the trees now very easily. Again, not looking for great detail, just basic shapes. If you get the colours and the tone right, you don't have to do detail. That detail will automatically be in the viewer's perception. They will make that detail up automatically. The mind does that. Your eyes can play tricks, they say. Well, they certainly do, because you can do an abstract painting and people can see anything in that. They see what they want to see. And this is very similar to a certain degree. those background trees now look like background trees, but there's no detail in there. So I'm just adding a few darker sort of branches within this tree, using the Payne's grey and perhaps a little bit of burnt sienna in there just to warm it up a little bit. Again, it's not a great deal of detail. I'm just getting an idea of the shapes of where these branches are going. And they will change as time goes on and as the painting goes on. That will all change. You'll be covering these with foliage, remember. But I always like to build the tree from inside out. So you start with the branches. You start with the trunk and then the branches leading off, and it gives you the overall shape, and then you dress it with the foliage afterwards. Again, I'm just establishing those darker areas now of that foliage in the tree with the fan brush. And you can see I'm rotating the fan brush as I go. I am not leaving it in one position and just dabbing it. That would give you too much of a regular shape that's repeated, and it doesn't look good. It should be random. So keep turning and twisting that brush as you put the paint on. You can see the effect it's giving you then. It's random. You slowly build up the tree's shape. And put the foliage where you like. It's your tree. You can make it however you want. I'm adding a few little darker areas underneath the tree because that will obviously be in shade, depending on where the light is coming from. In this particular one, it's coming from top right. A few darker areas now within the foreground. Still using the Payne's grey at the moment in this foreground. Now I've started to add a little bit of the yellow ochre, just re-emphasizing that sky, just brightening it up a little bit. It was a little bit too dull, so just add a little bit of the brighter white and Payne's grey. It takes on a whole different look. You can change the whole look of a painting just by the tone of the sky. I'm adding little bits of the sky colour through the tree where the light is going to be showing through the tree, because you'll never get a solid tree. There will always be places where the light shines through. Like that. And of course, when you're painting things like this, you can add a little bit of alizarin crimson, tiny amount of it to the white, and just add some clouds in like that with that colour, and you can even highlight them with a bit of yellow ochre and white. But I don't want to go too detailed on the clouds at this point. So now I'm adding the foliage on the tree where the light is hitting it. So think of the shapes of the foliage, and they are like big bunches, and obviously the light will hit the top of that bunch of leaves, but not the underneath of it. So you'll get the highlights on the tops of those bunches of leaves, and those create shapes, as you can see by this, where I've got the green will be towards the top of those bunches. I'm established some of the darkest areas again here because I've just lost one or two shapes, so I just need to re-establish them. Now we're going a little bit lighter with the green. You can see how they're starting to build up a tree-like shape. Again, rotating that brush all the time. Now you can have different shades of green, different colours of green in trees. There's cool greens, warm greens, orangey greens, lime greens, bluey greens. There's all sorts. you can spend hours, or even you could spend a lifetime just learning about the colour green. There are that many different variations. And it does pay to actually go out into the countryside and just look at the trees, just look at a woodland and see how many greens there are involved in that little scene that you're looking at. You'll be surprised. It's not just green. Look more closely. So now adding a few little, see how I'm using the brush sometimes in the upright position, just to create little weeds and things at the base of the tree. Again, a little bit, few more highlights. The more you do of this, the more you're adding layers and layers to the painting, and then it creates its own interest then and detail, because people can see the layers below the layers you're just painting on now, and that all adds to the painting's appeal. And people think, my goodness, look at all the time you've spent doing this, and you have spent a lot of time doing it. But this is an easy way of making it look like that, is with a fan brush. It's an invaluable painting brush, is the fan brush. It was originally devised for blending originally oil paints from one colour to another, or edges, blending the edges. But it is such a useful brush. As you can see, you can do absolutely anything with it. I'm more or less doing this entire painting with this fan brush. Now that's with yellow ochre and Payne's grey, just to establish the tone of the green that I want. Now a little bit more yellow ochre. It's starting to look a little bit lighter in areas now, where the light is catching it. Again, you can just create your own landscape. It's quite Bob Ross in a way. You know, this is your painting, and you can create it however you want. You don't necessarily need to go off photographs and use photographs for reference, or slavishly copy a photograph. You can use them for reference. Say, oh, that's a nice shape of a tree. I can use that in a painting. Or I like this little dirt track. You know, and use it in a different scenario. Use it with different trees and different compositions. Now I'm adding a little bit of the burnt sienna into the mix now, because this is going to be the dirt track. So I'm just scumbling some burnt sienna into there. It's still got some of the green and the yellow ochre on the brush. But we're going to add a little bit of white to it now and create a little bit more realism to this, where the light is hitting it. Being random again still, we get lighter as we go into the distance. So I'm using a smaller brush here, a little flat brush. Now with a smaller paintbrush, I'm just knocking in a few little darker bits and pieces, random little bits and pieces. These are going to be rocks and stones that populate this little dirt track. Now again, that's using a bit of burnt sienna and a little bit of Payne's grey in it to make it darker. Sometimes it's a bit too dark, so you might just have to tap it with your fingers and rub it as it's drying and move it around. It lightens it a little bit. But you can see on that side, the right hand side of that track, is obviously in shadow, where the sunlight's coming from the top right. Then the right hand side is going to be a little bit more in shadow. Now what I'm getting is a little bit more liquid now on the brush, and it's splattering time. So you get the paint on the brush, and it's got to be quite liquid and splatter it. Now with a lighter colour, using the burnt sienna and white, but you can go into different shades and eventually end up with lots with much, much brighter and lighter splatters. And you can tap them with your finger and move them around. If they don't look right, just rub them off before they dry. And then with a lighter colour again on the brush, just going over the top of some of those darker areas to show little highlights of the stones and the rocks. Don't get too carried away. You don't want it too realistic and too detailed, or else it won't harmonise with the rest of the painting. But you can see how relatively easy it is to create a stony, rocky little path. I'm not actually going off any reference here. This is all from memory. Now that same brush, I've splayed the ends of the bristles a little bit, and I'm adding some lighter greens with yellow ochre, Payne's grey and white, sometimes just yellow ochre and white over the top. And you can go into this as detailed as you want to. You can paint every blade of grass if you like, but it's only necessary to do a little bit here and there. People think, oh, that's grass. But then in the other little bits where there isn't any grass that you've painted, they will automatically think, oh, well, that's got to be the same. That's got to be grass as well. So you don't have to paint it. Let the eye of the viewer do the work. That's what painting is all about. Painting is an illusion. We are illusionists as artists, as painters. We're making a two-dimensional representation of a three-dimensional object. So it is an illusion. Using the brush in the upright position again now, with a little bit darker paint, Payne's grey and yellow ochre, to create some upright weeds, plants, nettles. Right, and then what I'll do is I'll clean that brush and get some lighter paint and do the same thing over the top. And they automatically look like little bunches of plants, as I say, nettles or bushes. Now you must pick out those little light areas again. Perhaps go a little bit lighter with them because, as I've said on other videos, most acrylic paints will dry slightly darker. So you have to paint a little bit lighter than you think you normally should. Oil paints, of course, don't have this problem. But oil paints are a lot messier to work with. I do like oil paints. I do love painting with oil paints. But acrylic paints is so much more easier to, especially to clean the brushes. It's so much easier. And if you make a mistake, you just go over it again immediately. It dries that quickly. So I'm just adding some lights now into that middle distance, and where the footpath joins that middle distance, we're getting lighter and bringing that lightness down into the path. One or two more little highlights with the brush, and we're more or less done. So I hope you've enjoyed watching this video and perhaps learned something. And if you have any questions or comments, I'd love to hear about them. Perhaps I can help you with a particular problem that you have. In the meantime, don't forget to keep painting and stay happy. And I look forward to seeing you on the next video.